Hi, I'm Scott Hodge, president of the Tax Foundation. Welcome to our virtual tax prom, or as Mark Prater calls it, junior prom. Now, I never went to my junior prom, but I am dressed up in my tux and I've got no place to go. You're probably comfortably at home in your bathrobe and slippers, and I'm really glad that you tuned in. We've got a great show for you tonight. You know, we started this back in 1937 with the first tax prom dinner. And in 1941, we started honoring public officials and others for their work in tax policy. We continued that tradition all through World War II, through Korea, Vietnam, recessions. We even had tax prom in 2000 when they were still counting hanging chads down there in Florida, and we didn't even know who the president was. Sounds familiar? And we even held tax prom after 9/11. But it took this crazy coronavirus to finally force us to cancel an in person tax prom for the first time in our 83 years. It's pretty sad. So we're trying something new, and we're coming together with a healthy dose of social distancing. You know, we won't need any of these tonight, and we probably won't need any of this tonight. But I tell you what, to get through tonight and the rest of the year, we're going to need a healthy dose of this. Rooted in Oakville, this is the best stuff. Hey, I'm delighted to be joined by our good friend Russ Sullivan, who we actually honored at a real tax prom event with our Distinguished Service Award back in 2013. Welcome, Russ.
Hey, Scott.
Here?
When are we gonna get this show on the road? What's the time frame?
Hey, Russ, I think we're on camera. We're on camera.
What?
We're on camera.
So okay, good. Scott, these are tough times. First, the Tax Coalition terminates the musical skits at the holiday party, and now we can't even watch tax nerds get drunk at the tax prom. What has the world come to? But I'm thanks to you, Scott Hodge, for clinging to the hope that CPAs, tax lawyers, and economists across the swamp still think the Tax Foundation can be entertaining.
Well, we're not very entertaining. You're the entertainment. You're entertaining. So thank you for co-hosting this virtual event with me. You know, Russ, before we get started, I do want to thank you, and I want to thank some other friends that have helped us. Folks like Mark Prater, who we honored in 2014, Janice Mays, who we honored in 2016, and Tom Bartholt, last year's honoree, for helping us put together this very, very special event. And, you know, this year's tax prom is dedicated to congressional staff, past and present. These are the unsung heroes of Capitol Hill, the folks that do the hard work, sweat the details, make their bosses look really good, and get very little of the credit. You know, and the sad thing is, because of COVID, this is the one night in which we honor congressional staff is the one night that we can't all come together and celebrate together. But we're going to do it as best we can virtually. And we have to thank our special sponsors, especially our platinum sponsors, the Business Roundtable, PepsiCo, FedEx, and Coca-Cola for making this tribute special. Oh, did we have a special delivery?
Well, they said this was urgent. I don't know, Scott.
Oh.
They just brought it in. It's from Kathleen Black.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I thought she retired. Didn't she retire from Coca-Cola?
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Oh.
Well, look. Yes. Just in time.
Well, why would she send me this? Oh, I see. I got you. Oh, Kathleen, look, I had another plan for product promotion for Coca-Cola later in the show, but I learned long ago to just do whatever Miss Black says to do. So here we go. All right, we do especially want to thank all of our sponsors who paid full price for this event as sponsors, even though it only costs about 1/5 the price of an event at the National Building Museum. So the nonprofit tax foundation calls that expansion money. Now, I think Lael Brainerd may subject to it to the new minimum tax on charitable book profits. Anyway, Scott, just as you are blazing a trail right through the coronavirus, we want to honor some other people who have broken the barriers. These women and men have opened up opportunities for other women and people of color so they could rise to the most important positions in the tax policy world. Some were in the House, some were in the Senate, some Democrats, and some Republicans.
Indeed. Hey, Russ, though, I do have a confession to make. When we honored you back in 2013, I thought you were the first. Yeah, it was a wonderful evening. And I thought you were the first congressional staffer that we had ever honored with our Distinguished Service Award. But, I was looking through our archives. I made a mistake. I was wrong. Back in 1962, back when you were just a pup, I'm sure, we honored Colin Stamm, who was then Chief of Staff of the Joint Committee on Taxation. And Colin Stamm was considered to be the tax expert's tax expert. And during the 1930s, as a young staffer on the committee, he actually took him 10 years to put together all the various tax legislation into what became the first tax code in 1939. And after he retired, he joined the Tax Foundation as a special consultant up until his unfortunate and untimely death on January 6th, 1966, which coincidentally was my 7th birthday.
Are you serious? I don't think you're serious, Scott.
I'm sorry.
I think you're just spouting fake news to get me to insist that I, Russ Sullivan, was truly the first staffer honored by the Tax Foundation. That I won that race to become the first staffer honored. And I'm not planning to concede to Colin Stamm or anybody else.
No recount?
No recount necessary, Scott.
Okay.
Look, I'm glad that Mr. Stamm compiled and organized that tax code, and we see what a good job he did, because now it's so easy to read and understand, especially since the Treasury Department has spent 3 years trying to decipher the TCJA and implement those rules. Now, look, if we were at the National Building Museum, we'd all be celebrating the brilliant tax policy in that CARES Act, wouldn't we? But since we can't do it, let's blaze some other trails. What do you say, Scott?
Sounds
President-elect Joe Biden. Can I say that here?
Oh, absolutely.
Has the Tax Foundation admitted that Joe Biden won?
That's anyway. Not fake news.
President-elect Biden has indicated that 240 years is long enough for the Treasury Department to be run by white males. Now, fortunately, the legislative branch was about 40 years ahead of the Treasury Department. Someone at the Ways and Means Committee 40 years ago was smart enough and bold enough to hire a young woman from Georgia named Janice Mays. Perhaps she was the original barrier breaker. And like her, other trailblazers have their own unique stories about how they came to Capitol Hill. Let's listen to a few of them.
And everybody said, you know what, if you're not totally positive, you should try Capitol Hill. You'll get exposed to a number of different areas and really figure out your path. And there's no greater access to information than on the Hill, like smart people, resources, all of that.
I interned on the Hill in 1999 at the brilliant young age of 12, clearly. They offered me a position prior to graduation, and I just loved it. I caught the proverbial bug. While I desperately needed to serve people, I needed a less stressful place, and I don't know what could be less stressful than Capitol Hill.
And I called Bernie Schmidt at the Joint Committee, and I said that I wanted to come in as a free intern because all my friends were working for Kennedy and all these other kind of, shiny names for free. But nobody did that at the Joint Committee, apparently. And they thought I was insane, but they hired me to come in as an intern.
So someone told me to go to the Joint Committee on Taxation. I didn't know anything about it. I applied to work for nothing, just to get on there, get some experience in my third year in law school. They hired me to come in. They actually gave me a salary, and interesting in those days, they put me at $45 for 15 hours, which is $3 an hour. I loved it so much, I was there over 40 hours a week.
The staff director of Bob's committee, a guy named Caesar Conda, who I think you well know, was my boss when I was his intern. I interned for one of the economic policy people on the committee. So Caesar calls me in September and says, in 1991, we think, based on your internship, that you could do the same job that the guy you worked for did, and we could pay you a third as much as we paid him. I made more money waiting tables in the weekends than I did working on Capitol Hill full time.
Scott, as you know, I'm from an area called Brownsville, Brooklyn, which is probably one of the only places in Brooklyn that's not been gentrified. So, taking a path to becoming a tax lawyer, let's say it's just not a traditional path from where I'm from. I sort of love the idea of marrying sort of my tax practice with economic development, which has always been sort of my view as far as giving back so I can do things to uplift the community where I was from. So I made the transition from Miller after about 2.5 years to starting working on Mr. Jefferson's staff as his tax aide back in the late 90s. And it was just an amazing experience. And the rest is history from there.
Really, I became most interested in tax as a summer associate at a law firm, Vincent & Elkins, where I ultimately was an associate, and I worked for some folks who are fairly well known to the Tax Coalition, Buck Chappeton and Chris Vaughn. And I was actually recruited by Russ Sullivan, who ultimately hired me on Capitol Hill.
First clerk for the tax court, and then I went to a law firm, Sutherland, Asbill and Brennan. And one of my colleagues there, George M., who you're probably also interviewing.
We have, yes.
He left the firm, went to work for the Senate Finance Committee because he was very interested in corporate tax reform. And when he was leaving the Hill, he wanted to go into academia. He recommended me to fill his position. So that's how I wasn't really looking to go to the Hill.
I don't know, it's just you get the political bug and it's hard to shake. So I knew that's where I wanted to be.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all staying well, and I'm sorry that circumstances prevent us from coming together in person this year. Thank you to the Tax Foundation for the necessary adjustments to hold Tax Prom virtually and keep all of us safe. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to say a few words tonight because the theme of the evening is one that I support wholeheartedly, a tribute to Congressional Staff. Anyone who has worked on Capitol Hill or engaged with Congress from the outside knows just how essential staff are to our legislative process. Members and senators may drive a lot of the action, but it's the diligent, detail-oriented staff work that gets bills over the finish line. We've certainly seen that play out this year as well. The COVID-19 crisis has tested our nation and the federal government like never before. And congressional staff, as always, they've risen to the challenge. I'm so proud of the Ways and Means tax staff who put in long hours and shouldered immense pressure to craft key provisions in the House pandemic relief packages. Thanks to their efforts, millions of American families, workers, and businesses have received essential assistance. Of course, joint tax staff are instrumental in the formation of our tax laws, as are the hard-working folks in the Legislative Counsel office. I know there have been many late nights and last-minute changes to major bills this year, and I'm grateful for the patience, adaptability, and quick thinking all of you have displayed. Personal offices are also filled with folks who play key roles in making tax policy successful. Thank you for your dedicated service. I know your bosses would echo my praise and indeed appreciation. So to all the congressional staff tuning in, tonight it's about honoring you and your excellent contributions. Thank you, and thank you again to the Tax Foundation for putting on this evening's program.
Thank you, Chairman Neal, for joining us. Whether we identify it or not, we've all benefited from a mentor in our tax policy career. Mine was Jim Gould, who previously served as staff director at the Senate Finance Committee under Senator Lloyd Bentsen of Texas. Mentors are critical to young staffers. Today's tax policy opportunities are greater because of the men and women, the people of color who have preceded them and who take an effort to mentor the staffers on the Hill. We should also thank the staff directors, the chairman, and the ranking members who put diversity and inclusion as a priority.
It's important to figure out or find your role models in people that have their sort of values right and the reason why they're here kind of very clear to them.
String of mentors, frankly. When I was a staffer, when I was a member, when I was a young member, who helped me quite a bit. It's always how I, got through life with mentors.
There were too many, and I don't want to name all the names because then I'll leave somebody out and then I'll get in trouble.
I think really throughout my career, I was so privileged to have people who were mentors, either formally or informally, people who I could look up to and watch and learn from.
Extraordinarily fortunate to have both John Buckley and Janice Mays as mentors, as role models here.
Janice Mays is always just the classiest person.
For me, it was Janice Mays.
So like everyone else, Janice Mays and, John Buckley for their insights and intellect, Mildeen Worrell. She was almost, I spent so much time in Mildeen's office.
Finance Committee, majority staff, Rod Yarman, certainly I've remained very close to. It was just all around, it was a tremendous experience.
Well, the Finance Committee is just, there's so many people that I can't even mention them. But one of the people that I admired most was David Crone at Harry Reid's office. And that guy could think politically. And he was, kind and direct and savvy.
Be very difficult and unfair to all of the staff who tried to help me and who shall remain blameless for my failings. But obviously the Finance Committee had a strong tradition, and equally of the staff who'd left. I don't think we should forget all the help that former staff provide than current staff.
It's funny, I always felt that I had to sort of live up to some of the giants that came before me, like Brenda and Mildeen and, some of the folks that that came before me. I felt like I had to follow in that mold, and my contemporaries are dope, right? I'm looking at the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, and they're, some of the more senior positions are folks who are my colleagues and sort of just awesome blacks in tax. And so I can't let them down, and whatever we can do to support each other, I think we try very hard to do.
Absolutely benefited from all the people who came before me.
That was something that Senator Roth and his Chief of Staff, John Duncan, felt very strongly about. They really, really thought that was a good move for me, and they really had to work hard at getting me in that position. Once I was there, I don't feel like there was any problem like accepting me as the first woman Chief of Staff. It took a little bit of time, but they were able to achieve it, and so much thank you for them for giving me that opportunity.
I'm really lucky. I think there are a lot of really strong, powerful women who paved the way for women and women like me.
As most people know, the Ways and Means Democratic staff is an incredibly diverse place. where I think, it is a combination of meritocracy and also a place where opportunities really exist for people of color and, women and female people of color. And so I've always felt incredibly welcome there, and just, there's really no more ideal place.
I think the government or the Congress in particular is a pretty great place for anyone to get ahead. And there was no glass ceilings there. Not for me, not that I thought.
I had the opportunity toward the end of my tenure at Ways and Means to be Chief Tax Counsel for Ways and Means when all 4 Chief Tax Counsels were women. There was a year there where all 4 of us were women. And maybe the coolest thing about that was almost nobody noticed.
Over my time on Capitol Hill, it has been really wonderful to see the changing composition of the people in the rooms. You have a lot more female staffers, you have a lot more staffers of color, and just watching that, the diversity that takes place in upper level hiring has been really impressive. At one point I did, it was a round table for the Tri-Caucus, which is sort of the 3 staffers of color caucuses, the Congressional Staff Associations, and I sat in this room speaking to people who are all 15 years younger than me, and I looked at all the people in this room, and it was it was actually heartening to see all of these young faces that were super interested in this world, that in all honesty, that representation wasn't there when I first started.
Thank you to the Tax Foundation and Scott Hodge for everything you do for the tax policy community. You're one of the few organizations in Washington that we can all count on to call the balls and strikes fairly, and that is a rare quality. And thanks for hosting the Tax Prom again this year by whatever means necessary. For an organization known for dynamic scoring, you're now risen to the occasion for dynamic planning. And I know that many of us could not go a year without hearing Scott's cringeworthy puns and humor. Could not do it. Each year, this event gives the tax community a chance to take a break from normal life, even if there's an entirely new normal these days. In years past, members of Congress, leaders of the administration, and other tax policy wizards are given the honor of being awarded the Distinguished Service Award. But in a year where everything is new, the foundation is changing things up. Tonight, I'm honored to recognize the unsung heroes of Capitol Hill, our Capitol Congressional Staff. From committee offices to personal offices, from our nonpartisan scorekeepers to legislative counsel, members of Congress depend on you, these public servants, to provide guidance, help us craft policies, fix problems, and find solutions for some of Congress's most complex issues. You're the folks who work behind the scenes, drafting the bills, sweating the details, scoring, and working late into the evenings. It takes patience, brilliance, determination, and most importantly, a love of our country and an appreciation for the good that can come from our nation's tax code. Our nation's tax laws, from the famous Reagan reforms to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and everything in between, simply couldn't be made without the dedication and the expertise of our talented congressional staff from both sides of the aisle. You're the glue that holds our tax code and Congress together. When we were working late, for example, on the historic Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there were many months of countless late nights when our team had to put in long hours, sacrificing time with their friends and family to help this nation see the first reforms in more than 30 years. And too often, you don't get the appreciation that you deserve. So to you, and to all the congressional staff and the tax policy teams on Capitol Hill who make tax legislation possible, thank you. We are so grateful for all that you do, and many of us consider it a blessing to call you our colleagues and, most importantly, our friends. So join me tonight with the Tax Foundation from wherever you are tuning in to toasting our unsung heroes, our congressional tax staff. Thank you.
Each of us who has served the nation at the IRS, Treasury, Ways and Means, Finance, or Joint Tax Committee has lived through a tense and memorable moment. It could be a hearing that became contentious. It could be a floor amendment where the outcome was not clear until the last vote was cast. It could be a members' meeting that didn't reach consensus. For some, the memory of 9/11 is seared into your brain. For others, it is the joy of the 1986 bipartisan tax reform. So many times our nation has faced a crisis, and just as many times people have come together to face it. For some currently serving, that will be defeating COVID-19. We asked some former staffers what moments they remembered most from their public service. You might be surprised at what they said.
I guess my favorite legislative experience was the TARP. I shouldn't say thrilling, but it was thrilling. I mean, the stakes were so high.
I think the moment in time where I realized it when I was in that moment too was during the financial crash in 2008. Actually, the week of TARP was my first week on the job as chief of staff.
In 2008, when we were struggling with the financial crisis and watching the TARP legislation.
Without getting into the economics of it, we were all worried about going into a deflationary spiral.
And so shortly after Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson called Speaker Pelosi and, as has been widely reported, told her, we have a problem. And she said, I'll convene the caucus tomorrow. And they said, that's not soon enough. We have to talk now.
Steny Hoyer, who's I've been friends with for years, came to Eric Cantor, myself, and Kevin McCarthy.
The seriousness with which they described the problem, the silence of all the other members around the phone, and
being voted on the House floor, and I was down there for the vote. You know, if you were to step into the cloakroom, you could see the news channels and watch the markets just dive bombing.
The vote is going down, and the stock market is just crashing.
What this actually means, what this will mean for our country, and all those of us who remember it, that bill failed. You know, we watched that bill go down.
And I said, the stock market's crashing. We got to do something. We got to pass this. I'm like, you guys all voted no. You said you were going to vote no. We told you this had to pass. Yeah.
So you're not really aware of the consequence, the magnitude of of what was going on. And when we finally, when we realized,
it's possible that we could not have a U.S. economy if Congress doesn't act.
It was pretty exciting to be part of that solution. And we were in a lot of big rooms with a lot of important people.
It's something that was so nationwide and really, made your heart stop. That was probably one of them.
Just very kind of knife edge moments where, pretty big consequences.
Really. Christopher Dodd called us all aside after we got the final agreement and told us, interesting thing, very kind and very generous of him to do that because it was like 3 a.m, and told us people will never know what didn't happen because we worked so hard on this bill. He said, always remember that. I never forgot that, really. That's a big deal. And we think about that now, don't we? But that was a really special effort. I was proud of that.
Very sobering, but also it helps you understand what you're doing there and why you're doing it. It was a very educational experience for me, and I think one I'll never forget and hope to never relive.
Good evening, Tax Prom. This is Ron Wyden coming from Southeast Portland, Oregon today. I appreciate the opportunity to join you for a few minutes, especially because this year's Tax Prom is all about honoring the work of tax staff. Now, I'm a lawyer in name only. Fortunately, I do have a terrific team of lawyers as well as economists and experts in all areas of tax law. And I'm routinely amazed at all that they're able to accomplish. The ideas, the drafting, the support they're able to build. And then we members somehow have it easy. We propose an idea and presto, it comes to us in professional form. That all starts with extraordinary skill, integrity, and hard work of the tax staff. I'm very grateful to them, starting, of course, with our Chief Tax Counsel, Tiffany Smith. Tiffany is not one who chases the spotlight, but she is really a tax policy all-star, always looking for creative ideas, always finding a solution that really works, putting in long hours, and then on top of it, leading a top flight team. Adam, Chris, Bobby, Sarah, John, Drew, Rachel, and Ashley all make up Tiffany's terrific, outstanding squad. Of course, I've also got to give a shout out now to Tom Bartold and the team at Joint Tax Legislative Council, and so many others who staff the Finance Committee offices. I also want to say that this year's Tax Prom is calling attention to the fact that the community of people at the top of the tax policy pyramid is beginning to look a whole lot more like the country as a whole. That is long overdue. Having a more diverse group at the table when it comes time to debate big tax changes is guaranteed to make the outcome a whole lot better. And that ought to continue, not just in tax, but in all the policy areas the Senate deals with. So let me again say thank you to Tiffany and my whole tax team, to Tom and the JCT staff and Legislative Council. As I said, I'm here at home at my kitchen table in Southeast Portland. From where I sit, the hard work and expertise of the Senate Finance Committee Democratic tax staff is literally, folks, a kitchen table issue. I hope everybody's healthy and safe. I wish all of you a great evening.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. That was terrific. Thank you. Very kind. You know, I've always thought that the tax community is like a family. And Tax Prom is kind of like a family reunion. And, you know, like every family reunion, we have our diverse political opinions and persuasions. And like every family reunion, we have our weird, overly opinionated uncles who have probably had a little bit too much to drink. And I won't name names, George Callis, Dave Lewis, and well, never mind. But we all have the same DNA. We all love tax policy. And everyone who served on Capitol Hill has a story, a favorite memory about their life on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, I've been on the Hill a long time, so the list is unending, right?
A lot of moments that I will remember forever.
I think for most of us, it's true that every day that you're walking into the Capitol or the Ways and Means room or the Ways and Means library, you're pinching yourself. And I think if you're not, that's when you know it's time to leave.
There's a lot of them, you know, when you work in the Capitol and you go home every night and you turn around, if you fail to be odd, then you don't belong there.
Yeah, I mean, I got to work on some big projects. I got to work on some pretty large pieces of legislation, actually writing law. And I was, 25, 26 years old. I was pretty amazed that at a young person, you can make such a big difference so early on in life in our system.
One thing, my high school civics teacher met up with me when I was in my first congressional spot. That was a bit, it was like, yeah, you were an AP government teacher. Here I am doing that stuff.
It was just crazy. Most days you just couldn't believe you're on the floor of the Senate where all of the senators are.
Yeah, I wrote a lot of immigration amendments that made it into law when we did immigration reform in those days. There were quite a few things on spending. Those are heady days. Like I said, I was 25, 26 years old. And really enjoyed that process quite a bit.
I look back at 17 years of legislation, and it's hard to pick and choose among them.
Well, I think I will have to say the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It was really cool to be able to be a part of the first big tax reform since '86. Chairman Brady would always talk about it as a generational event, and for me, it really did feel generational.
Come on. Opportunity zones.
Well, I had
obviously. Look, I mean, it's like a commercial.
One of my best experiences was working with Sam Johnson's office and Kathleen Black on an Innocence Project bill that was about wrongfully incarcerated individuals and their tax treatment when they receive an award years later. And so We worked on this bill for years while I was there and while Kathleen was there. And finally, just a couple years ago, it became law. And so we all went back to the Hill and celebrated. And it was just it was one of those things where you could see the real impact it was having on people's lives.
I remember very amusingly, it was the 2001 tax bill. Vice President had to come break a tie. And I remembered I was flying through the back to try to get off the floor to go take a call or something. And I almost flattened him. And I'm like, I just almost ran into the vice president. And mostly I was like, why didn't the Secret Service stop me? Because I was full steam ahead, charging through.
And the Capitol and working with the members is such a human thing, their personal interactions. You have to be there.
Mr. Rangel became chairman for me, and just seeing him in the chairman's seat with the gavel, and just being from New York and just sort of knowing the rich history and how well he represented that committee, it's always stuck in my mind that it made me personally, even though I wasn't on his staff, I was honored to be a Ways and Means staffer and to be able to say I'm serving under Chairman Rangel.
I would say literally the first day, there was a member caucus and all the members filed in, and therein walks John Lewis. And I thought, this is crazy. After the meeting, they were leaving and he turned to me, put his hand out, gave me a handshake and said, welcome to the committee. And I just melted. And it was like, I'm never gonna wash this hand again.
I've spent decades writing tax law and conducting oversight of the Internal Revenue Service. I know firsthand that it takes an awful lot of finesse, tenacity, and even grit to grind the gears and get the job done. And so do the legions of highly qualified and committed foot soldiers on Capitol Hill who work in the legislative trenches, writing, negotiating, fixing, and reforming tax laws. Congressional staff work behind the scenes and are too often underestimated and underappreciated and maybe even unknown. As committed public servants, you work around the clock, knee-deep in the legislative weeds. You're expected to navigate political minefields with unreasonable deadlines. Many of you have probably crawled into your bed with the provisions of the tax code dancing in your heads. You're the tax mechanics that Congress leans on for your expertise. We actually really depend on you. Thanks to the extraordinary efforts by congressional staff just this year, Congress passed the CARES Act to provide pandemic relief and a financial lifeline to individuals and small businesses across America. I want to thank each one of you for your work and to give credit where credit is due, because it isn't often given to people like you. Too many unsung heroes who miss family events, skipped vacations, and worked into the wee hours of the weekend. I thank you for your service, and there's sacrifice in that as well. Your work matters, and I know it makes big differences. Keep up that good work.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. And we're praying that you and Barbara conquer this virus quickly and return back swiftly. You know, as public servants in this unpredictable tax world, all staffers need some advice on how to succeed. I remember when I was on the Hill, particularly in the early years, asking numerous people for advice on how to make it in my career. Nick Giordano always advised me, Russ, when you turn in a memo, don't staple it. Senator Moynihan won't read it. Instead, only use paper clips, and they must be green. Good advice, Nick. But let's hear some even better advice from a few of our trailblazers.
My advice for a young staffer on the Hill would be to remember every day what a privilege it is to be in your role and to enjoy every minute of it, because you will look back on it very fondly.
Understand where you are, right? And how incredibly special the place is.
The most important thing I've learned is just how important, sort of civility and how civility can build great relationships and meaningful ones. How important that is, not just to sort of developing as a staffer, but truly in terms of developing as a person.
Always at least 3 sides to every issue. If you just say there's a yes or a no here, that's their only vote. Other than voting president, which is lame, but there's always 360-degree view on every vote. And even if your boss is going to vote yes or no or whatever on the issue, you need to understand the other points of view.
The mic is always hot. A lot of people think that applies to your boss. Mainly applies, I think, to staff. And so for me, this means be careful what you say.
But the key to succeeding, and it's not just as a tax lawyer, it's true of many, many professions, is you work harder than everybody else. It's frequently not a well-accepted concept, but the truth is there's a lot of truth to it.
You are going to be yelled at by everyone for things you do, for things your boss does, for things your staff does, and you know what? Just learn to take it and walk away, because it's still the best job you'll ever have.
Have relationship with lobbyists, have relationship with other staffers, have relationships with both committee and personal and tax committees and joint tax. I just think those relationships and those interactions are just so incredibly valuable. Not just from the knowledge that you gain, but just from the awareness and understanding of how things work. Especially, I think, as things get so partisan.
Really don't want to make enemies. You really want to be open to all kinds of ideas. You need to understand that the person who's opposing you this time, you may be working with 2 weeks later.
We are not the members, they are, and we're not elected officials, but they are, and that they have thousands of people that they represent.
Never tell someone that something is really hard, because it'll just freeze their brain. Unless you're a tax person, usually you think tax is really hard, because most people just have this natural reaction thinking tax is so difficult and locked down. And if you said, not hard, I can explain it to you. Yeah, there's some details, but let me just boil it down and give you the basic. They relax, they learn what they need to know.
Always be humble and know that you have a lot to learn. You might be in a powerful place, but you have a lot to learn. And some of it is because you're smart, but some of it is just being in the right place at the right time. So just treat others with kindness and respect and humility, and you'll have a great career.
Does your superior think that's a kid with great attitude? No task is beneath her, no task is beneath him. They're willing to do whatever it takes to advance the cause. They have a great attitude. If you're that person, that's the person your superiors will want to advance. That's the person who's not threatening to other people. That's the person who gets ahead. I'm a big believer that that's what wins the day. The difference maker in staffers, as a person who's hired hundreds of staffers, is not aptitude, not intelligence. Everybody's got that. It's attitude.
I tell you what, no matter how long we've been in the game, we can all take away something from all that advice. That's fantastic stuff. Hey, Russ, I want to thank you for co-hosting this fantastic tribute to congressional staff, past and present. It's been a delight, a lot of fun. And I also want to thank my production team, Dan Carvajal, who did all the splicing of those videos together, and Colby Pastor for doing all the back-end work. What a fantastic job. And most of all, I want to thank the people that I got to interview. What a pleasure that was. What a fun time I had interviewing all of you. And thank you so much for sharing all of your time and being so open with all of your stories. We had over 9 hours of videotape to try to distill into this 1 hour program. And we left way too many stories on the cutting room floor. And so I'm really pleased to announce that we posted all of the interviews in their entirety so that you can spend all of your Thanksgiving holiday binge watching your favorite tax stars. I got to tell you that tax people are some of the most interesting people you will ever meet. And so many of the people that I got to meet and interview were really witnesses to history. And it's just a teaser you've got to watch. Actually, the first interview I did was with Ken Keyes, and it was a really fascinating, in-depth interview about the golden age of tax policy back in the 1980s and 1990s. And then go on to listen to the interviews with George Yin and David Morgan. Each of them recounted from very different perspectives that very famous episode with Bill Thomas with the Capitol Police and the Democrats, and they dragged them out of the caucus room. Fascinating stuff. And I'll just never forget that fascinating interview I did with the shy and reserved Jennifer DeCaster, who tells a historical story about writing a bill to outlaw cockfighting. You will simply cry laughing. And thanks for all of you for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you all in person next year at the National Building Museum. So please stick around for the after party, and I will reveal the results of all of our poll questions. So good night and be safe.